We're going to be ranking and tier listing all 13 hex perks in Dead by Daylight, starting with the absolute worst and ending with the best. The only perk we have in D tier at number 13 in absolute last place we have is Hex Ruin, a rare perk from the Hag, and it is the worst perk out of all the hex perks. It used to be the absolute best perk of all time, then it got nerfed and was still great until it got nerfed again last year. The perk in its last version used to actually regress generators survivors weren't working on automatically at 200% speed, which was insane. But now this perk is a non-factor because survivors can easily sit on a gen and work right through it, totally ignoring this perk. And now that it's at 100% regression instead of 200%, even if you do scare a survivor off the gen, it only regresses at 0.5 charges per second, meaning at 99 gen will take 190 seconds to reach 0. You can actually scare a survivor off the gen, have an entire chase, and hook that survivor, and the gen will have only regressed by 10 to 15% if no other survivors hopped on it to keep working on it. Starting off D tier and runner up for last place at number 12 is Hex Thrill of the Hunt, a general hex perk that already comes with 5 tokens, and for each token you have it slows down the cleansing speed of totems by 10%. So at 5 tokens, totems take 50% longer to cleanse, which doubles the amount of time, making it 28 seconds to cleanse a totem in total. This perk was actually better before because it would also give you a loud noise notification if any survivor started cleansing a hex totem, but it eventually got removed because it was considered unfair that a killer can defend a perk that can be permanently erased from the game. Not to mention, if Thrill of the Hunt gets cleansed first, all 5 of the tokens disappear instantly. In 11th place, we've got Hex Huntress's Lullaby, a unique perk from the giant Russian psycho bunny mommy herself. And unfortunately, it's an outstandingly mediocre perk. It requires 5 stacks to reach its maximum effectiveness, and its 5th stack version is actually weaker than its 3 to 4th stack version. Each time a survivor misses a skill check, it tacks on an additional 6% penalty to the default penalty of 10%. And it also reduces the time between the skill check warning sound and the skill check itself appearing by 14% for each token. Now I know you're thinking that sounds great, harder skill checks and an extra 6% penalty in progress, and you'd be right if survivors ever missed skill check. Even with the audio cue being off, it's still terribly easy to hit the skill checks, and it needs to get stacks by hooking people. And as you'll soon see, there's a far better perk that has the same token requirement and blows this one out of the water. But if you're using it against Twitch streamers or people who just reading chats in general or new people, it is a very insane perk because it's essentially like being hit with a pain res every time you miss a skill check. Kicking off C tier at 10th place is Hex the Third Seal, another hag perk. Any survivors you injure are permanently blind and they can't see any auras until the totem is cleansed. This is actually better than Ruin because a surprising amount of the time survivors will forget someone is hooked and you can get a free second hook stage out of a survivor. Not to mention that the most used survivor perk of all time is Windows of Opportunity, an aura reading perk that allows survivors to see windows and pallets at all times. And that perk is completely shut down by the Third Seal. Up next at number 9 is Hex Crowd Control, a unique perk from the Trickster. This perk blocks all windows that a survivor fast vaults through. This is definitely a pretty solid perk, but then again, most maps only have a few windows, save for a few. Pallets make up most of what survivors use to loop killers. Don't get me wrong, it's solid, but considering it can be cleansed right off the bat and nothing happens, like all hex perks, I think you're far better off just bringing Claustrophobia, which blocks all the windows on the map for 60 seconds after each time a generator is completed, since that's not a perk that can be cleansed, and in my opinion it's just better. And also survivors can counter Hex Crowd Control by slow vaulting a window. Up next at number 8 is Hex Blood Favor, a unique perk from the Blight, which in theory seems like an awesome concept until you actually use it in a match. This perk blocks all pallets in a 32-meter radius after injuring a survivor, and you may think that sounds great considering survivors only really have pallets and windows to slow you down, and that getting rid of one of them would help you a bunch. But that's when you put on this perk and hop into a game and you hit a survivor before they reach a pallet, and you'll notice that the survivor runs to the next loop with the speed boost that they get from being hit, which just so happens to be over 32 meters away. So this perk really does nothing 95% of the time. It only blocks pallets that haven't been dropped yet, so if the pallet's already been dropped at that loop, it'll do nothing. Really, the only good thing this does is if there's multiple survivors at one loop and you injure one, you can get multiple injuries pretty easily. Moving on to B tier, at number 7 is Hex Retribution, a pretty decent perk that reveals the auras of all survivors for 15 seconds after a hex totem is cleansed. This may sound like it's crazy overpowered, and that's because it definitely can be if you're running a bunch of hex perks and they get cleansed in a different order. But as long as it's not the first one cleansed, if it's the first one cleansed, you only get the 15 seconds out of it once. There's a possible situation where you could get up to 4 uses out of the perk, totaling a full minute of aura read, which would make this perk go way higher up to like A tier. And if you stack on Lethal Pursuer with it, instead of a 15-second aura read, it'll be 17 seconds, so you'll get over a minute of aura reading. But in the situation where this gets cleansed first, it can allow for like 1 to 2 mind games at most, then it's gone. Definitely an underrated hex perk for sure, but then again, I think you'd be better bringing pretty much any other hex perk. And now at number 6, we have a simple and unique perk from the Spirit, Hex Haunted Grounds. This is a very simple hex perk that does nothing until it gets cleansed. It's the only hex perk that lights up 2 totems. After one totem is cleansed, the other totem deactivates and all survivors are exposed for the next 60 seconds. 60 seconds of exposure really isn't that great or game changing by any means, but it's always a nice passive deterrence to cleansing hex totems in general. Survivors just knowing that this perk exists makes them always question themselves if a totem should be cleansed or not. And even when I see a hex totem, I always second guess myself and wonder if that's Haunted Grounds, and this decision to cleanse this totem is going to cost our team some huge pressure in the early game. Kicking off A tier at number 5 is Hex Plaything, a unique perk from the Cenobite. This perk makes the survivors who are hooked by the killer oblivious as long as the related totem is still standing. When a survivor is hooked, a random hex totem spawns in the game, and as long as that totem is standing, survivors won't be able to see. Oblivious is already a pretty strong status effect since it basically makes the killer undetectable to that survivor. They won't hear the terror radius or heartbeat or see the red stain. This alone warrants it being A tier alone just for the stealth effect. And if you combine it with a perk like Hex Pentimento, which we'll get to later, this perk suddenly becomes S tier very quickly. Next up at number 4, we have a general killer perk called Hex No One Escapes Death, aka Hex Noed or just Noed. This perk is a really solid in-game crutch perk that allows you to move 4% faster and insta-down survivors when the last generator is powered. I only don't recommend it because you can end up relying on the perk too much, and that's not good. But all in all, it's a pretty fair perk considering it reveals its location of the survivors and the range at which it's revealed increases over a certain period of time. A really good choice for weaker killers to have a fighting chance if things don't go their way. Starting off S tier at number 3, we have Hex Undying, which is another unique hex perk from the Blight. This is basically a second chance perk for any of your hex perks. Anytime your hex perk gets cleansed, this totem transfers the tokens and the related effects to the new totem. I really can't overstate how good of a perk this is. Being able to have a second chance on your stronger hex perks and actually being able to get value out of them instead of losing them in the first 30 seconds of the game is amazing. And for anyone who runs hex builds, it's essentially a must run. This perk was also much better in the past as it could give your hex perks up to 4 lives because it would keep transferring as long as the Undying totem wasn't the first one cleansed. At number 2, we have Hex Pentimento, a unique hex perk from the artist. Now this perk is one of the very best, simply because it perfectly synergizes with any other hex perks. Anytime a totem is cleansed, you can use Hex Pentimento to relight the broken totem, and immediately all generators are slowed down by 30%. Combine this with Hex Plaything and you leave survivors with a lose-lose scenario. Be oblivious permanently or have gens slowed down by 30%. Not an easy choice to make. And if they cleanse both of them, then it'll waste 30 seconds for each survivor. And if they do cleanse Plaything and then they do cleanse Pentimento, that's a whole 30 seconds that each survivor wastes. So it's slow down no matter what. It also has a token-like system where the second relit totem slows healing by 30%, the third relit totem slows recovery in the dying state by 30%, the fourth slows exit gate opening speed by 30%, and the fifth token blocking all the totems permanently, meaning that the effects can't be removed. But needless to say, its first token is its best. And finally, above S tier, in its own tier at number 1, the Devour tier, we have a hex perk again from the Hag in a complete tier of its own, head and shoulders above all the rest, and that's Hex Devour Hope. This perk is far and away the best hex perk out of all of them because it does a little bit of everything. This perk does absolutely nothing at 1 token, and to get a token you have to hook a survivor and be at least 24 meters away when they get unhooked. But at 2 tokens, you get a 5% haste boost 10 seconds after hooking a survivor that lasts 10 seconds. At 3 tokens, all survivors are permanently exposed. The 4th token changes nothing, you keep the haste and exposed effects, but at the 5th token you are granted the ability to kill all survivors by your own hands regardless of the hook state. If they've been hooked once, twice, 0 times. They were AFK the entire game and you find them in the corner of the map, you can insta-kill them. I don't think I really need to explain why this is the best, to be honest. Even if you never get to the 5th token, the second you reveal you have Devour Hope by downing a survivor or using a special attack, all the survivors in the match will immediately stop working on gens and do everything in their power to find and destroy that totem. Meanwhile, you're insta-downing survivors, which creates even more pressure, and survivors are left with a difficult choice. If they leave a survivor on the hook, then their blood is on their hands. But if they save them, her hunger grows. That's the perk description, by the way. It's pretty dope. Also a 5 token system, just like Huntress's Lullaby, but by far better in pretty much every single way. So there you have it, all 14. Wait, 14? Oh, I'm missing one. Oh yeah, Hex Nowhere to Hide. A unique perk from the night. Don't run this perk unless you're playing Pig or doing an impossible skill check build. It's D tier at best. And that does it. All 14 Hex perks ranked definitively. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And let me know if you guys actually think Nowhere to Hide is better than what I give it credit for. I just don't think it's that great, to be honest.